Imagine driving down a quiet street late at night, eyes fixed on the road, heart heavy with the day's troubles, only to see flashing blue and red lights in your rearview mirror. That sudden jolt of adrenaline, that moment of confusion and fear, can change your life forever. But what if the officer behind you is no ordinary cop, and well, you're no ordinary driver either? In this story, a routine traffic stop erupts into a chaotic spectacle. One man's badge is on the line, and another man's life and dignity hang in the balance. You won't believe what the dashcam caught and the stunning fallout that followed. It was a humid August evening in Louisville, Kentucky. The lights of passing cars cut through the darkness, their beams illuminating a quiet stretch of road near the fringes of downtown. Street lamps cast jagged shadows across the asphalt, and cicadas serenaded the night with their raucous electric song. In his black sedan, Malcolm Rivers drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, trying to unwind from a grueling day. He had just returned from a field operation involving a bank fraud case, and the stress clung to him like the lingering humidity. His only thought was to reach home, slump into bed, and let his mind shut off for a few precious hours. Malcolm was no ordinary man driving at night. He was a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, stationed at the Louisville field office. Among his peers, he was known for his professionalism and an unshakable commitment to upholding justice. He was meticulous and level-headed, qualities that had earned him the respect of higher-ups within the FBI. Yet, he kept a low profile, never one to flash his credentials except when absolutely necessary. The city of Louisville had been his home for nearly a decade now, and he had grown to love its energy, its complexities, and even its simmering tensions. He never imagined that on this unsuspecting night, everything he held dear, his career, his principles, would face a challenge more personal and more immediate than any sting operation he'd ever run. A few blocks behind Malcolm's sedan, a Louisville Metro Police Department squad car had been tailing him discreetly for nearly 2 miles. The officer driving it was Bradley "Brad" Jenkins, a man whose reputation had long been marred by rumors of overreach and a questionable record of traffic stops. Jenkins was rumored to be overly aggressive, especially toward individuals he deemed suspicious. Other officers whispered about the multiple complaints lodged against him, though none had stuck well enough to force the department's hand. Some said he was just a hard-nosed cop, while others murmured about deeper prejudices. Jenkins himself believed he was simply doing his job, prideful about keeping the streets safe. That evening, as Jenkins cruised in his patrol car, his attention fixed on the dark sedan up ahead. He spotted a small detail. Perhaps the car swerved slightly, or maybe Jenkins thought the driver tapped the brakes too slowly at a yellow light. Something trivial that gave him the pretense he needed to flick on his lights. The dash cam on his cruiser recorded him muttering, "Let's see who we've got here." Even though there was no immediate violation, Jenkins felt an itch for action. A stop would break the monotony of a quiet shift. He flipped on the sirens, accelerating until he was right behind Malcolm's sedan. Malcolm noticed the red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. The sharp wail of the siren seemed to pierce his chest. He felt that familiar jolt, the universal thud of the heart that comes when you realize you're being pulled over. Instinctively, he checked his speedometer. He hadn't been speeding. He'd used his signals. His registration was current, and his driver's license was up to date. Confusion mingled with alarm. As an FBI agent, he often found himself on the giving end of law enforcement operations, but rarely on the receiving end. Carefully, Malcolm steered to the shoulder of the road, mentally rehearsing the correct procedure: keep hands visible, remain calm, and politely comply until it was appropriate to mention his credentials. Meanwhile, Jenkins parked behind the sedan, unbuckled his seatbelt, and stepped out into the humid night. The streetlight overhead illuminated a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead. His posture was tense, adrenaline spiked through him as he anticipated confrontation or compliance. Either one might satisfy his itch for control. Malcolm rolled down the driver's side window, keeping his hands firmly on the wheel. He inhaled deeply, steadying himself. He knew that reaching for anything too soon could escalate the situation, no matter how unfounded that escalation might be. He had seen it happen too many times in news reports and police records. Jenkins approached, shining a flashlight directly at Malcolm's face. The cop's eyes narrowed. "Evening," he said curtly. "License and registration." Malcolm's calm baritone reply was respectful. "Yes, officer. May I reach into my glove compartment?" Jenkins hesitated, as if the routine request somehow signaled defiance. "Yeah, but slowly," he growled, keeping his other hand close to his holster. The tension was palpable. Malcolm could feel the waves of suspicion emanating from Jenkins. Malcolm carefully opened the glove box, pulled out the registration, and handed it over along with his license. Jenkins flicked a glance at the documents, then at Malcolm. "Do you know why I stopped you?" His voice was laced with a challenge, as though daring Malcolm to question his motives. "No, officer," Malcolm replied honestly. "I wasn't speeding, to my knowledge. All my lights are working. Is there a specific reason?" Jenkins didn't answer immediately. Instead, he insisted, "Step out of the vehicle." Those words echoed with an unmistakable authority that made Malcolm's heart skip. He was well aware of his rights, and he knew a traffic stop typically didn't require him to exit unless there was suspicion of intoxication or other wrongdoing. But the surest path to diffuse tension was often to comply. At least, that was the usual logic. Malcolm paused, forced a polite smile, and asked, "May I ask why?" He kept his tone level, firm but not confrontational. Jenkins scowled, shining the flashlight directly into Malcolm's eyes. "I said, step out of the vehicle," he repeated. Behind him, the dashcam captured every single gesture, every nuance of the exchange. Jenkins positioned himself so that his body language read as aggressive, something not lost on Malcolm, who had studied body language extensively in his FBI training. Yet, Malcolm complied, opening the door slowly and stepping onto the asphalt with both hands visible. Jenkins looked him up and down. Malcolm was dressed casually, a simple t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Jenkins barked, the tension in his voice practically crackling in the humid air. Malcolm complied. "Officer, I don't mean to complicate things," he said, choosing his words carefully. "But I'm actually—" He didn't get to finish the sentence. Jenkins stepped closer, a menacing gleam in his eyes. "Turn around," he ordered. Then, without waiting for compliance, he reached out as though to physically move Malcolm. Though Malcolm was well trained in defensive tactics, he didn't resist. Instead, he turned slowly, placing his hands behind his back. Malcolm felt steel handcuffs snap around his wrists, the cold metal biting into his skin. "Hold on," Malcolm interjected calmly. "I'm an FBI agent. My credentials are inside my jacket on the passenger seat." But Jenkins either didn't hear him or chose not to. He pressed Malcolm's torso against the sedan, patting him down. "An FBI agent, huh?" Jenkins sneered, shaking his head in disbelief. "Real convenient. Let me guess, you've got a fancy badge in there. Maybe even a toy gun." His condescending tone made Malcolm's blood run cold. Malcolm felt a swirl of anxiety and anger. Racially charged thoughts flickered across his mind, though he tried not to jump to conclusions. He had grown accustomed to being cautious whenever dealing with local law enforcement, but this was something else. The hostility was immediate, pervasive. Meanwhile, across the street, a pair of bystanders lingered on the sidewalk, their phones out. They began to record. The soft glow of their phone screens dotted the dark. Malcolm noticed them in his peripheral vision, simultaneously relieved and anxious that witnesses were present. Sometimes the presence of cameras de-escalated a situation, but other times it made an agitated cop double down on authority. Jenkins, bristling with a sense of righteous indignation, moved Malcolm toward the rear of the sedan. "You know, I've seen this trick 100 times, the cop snapped. "People pull out some fake badge, say they're FBI or D or some nonsense. You think I'm new?" Malcolm took a steadying breath. "It's not a trick, Officer Jenkins. My name is Special Agent Malcolm Rivers, FBI Louisville Field Office. If you check the pocket of my jacket, all I see is a man who can't follow basic instructions." Jenkins cut him off. "You're acting suspicious. Now shut it, or I'll have you in the back of my squad car for resisting an officer." The threat hung thick in the air. Jenkins marched back to glance into the sedan. He spotted a slim black garment bag on the passenger seat. He yanked it open and found a leather wallet with an FBI badge tucked neatly inside. A microsecond of uncertainty flickered across the officer's face, but it was gone in an instant. He doubled down, returning to Malcolm with even more hostility. "Where'd you get the badge? eBay?" At that moment, Malcolm realized he might be dealing with someone for whom reason simply wasn't enough. He felt the tug of old resentments and old memories, times when he had been unjustly profiled during his teenage years. But now, the stakes were infinitely higher, and he was on duty all the time, by virtue of his position. He responded calmly, "The FBI has records of every credential issued. If you radio it in, they'll confirm. Call your dispatcher. I'll give you my FBI identification number." Jenkins's face contorted. He seemed torn between wanting to confirm the credentials and wanting to maintain his stance of authority. The dashcam clearly captured his next words, which would later become the seeds of his downfall. "I don't need to verify anything. I know a con when I see one." The officer reached up and pressed the transmit button on his shoulder mic, but instead of checking Malcolm's ID, he merely requested backup for a suspicious individual, possibly armed. Malcolm's heart pounded. Being forcibly cuffed, labeled armed and dangerous, invited an immediate risk of escalation when additional officers arrived. Yet, he remained composed. "Officer, please," he began, voice measured. "This is all a misunderstanding. Let me help you de-escalate this. Call the Louisville Field Office. Ask for Supervisor Paula Stein. She can confirm who I am." Jenkins didn't even look at him. Instead, the officer forced Malcolm to sit on the curb, hands still cuffed behind his back. The asphalt radiated heat from the day's sun, and sweat beaded on Malcolm's forehead. The two bystanders across the street continued recording. Another car slowed as it passed, the driver's eyes wide at the unfolding scene. Time ticked by excruciatingly, each second heightening the tension. Malcolm considered whether to remain silent or to continue trying to talk sense into Jenkins. He also wondered what would happen if Jenkins decided to search his car thoroughly and found his service weapon locked in the glove compartment. He had stored it properly, but this was the kind of situation where details could be twisted. Before long, a second patrol car arrived, lights flashing. Two officers stepped out. One was a woman in her early 30s with bright, watchful eyes. The other was a man in his 40s, stoic and cautious. They approached, glancing between Jenkins and the man in handcuffs. "Officer Jenkins," the woman said, "what have we got?" He jerked his thumb toward Malcolm. "Guy was driving suspiciously. Claims he's FBI. Found a fake badge in his car. Might be armed." The older officer frowned, noticing Malcolm's calm demeanor and the posture that looked more like forced compliance than aggression. "Sir," he said, addressing Malcolm directly, "do you have any form of identification?" Malcolm nodded toward the leather wallet Jenkins had tossed on the hood of the sedan. "That's my FBI badge and ID. My name is Malcolm Rivers. If you contact the Louisville Field Office, they'll confirm. I also have a driver's license with my name on it, which your colleague already took." The woman officer reached for the wallet and opened it, examining the badge closely. She took out Malcolm's ID card. Silence reigned for a moment, broken only by the whir of distant traffic. She glanced at Jenkins, then at Malcolm. "We'll need to verify." She lifted the radio to her mouth and actually made the call that Jenkins had refused to. The older officer stood near Malcolm, scanning his face. Something about Malcolm's composure made the officer suspect they might be dealing with a legitimate federal agent. The voice on the other end of the radio confirmed Malcolm's identity within minutes. "Yes, that's correct. Special Agent Malcolm Rivers is assigned to the Louisville field office." In that instant, the entire dynamic changed. The female officer's eyes widened. The older officer exhaled in disbelief. Jenkins's jaw tightened. Malcolm half expected immediate apologies and a release from the cuffs. Instead, Jenkins only seemed more embittered, as though he'd been cornered. His pride was at stake. He stared daggers at Malcolm, who was still sitting on the curb. The female officer cleared her throat, stepping toward Malcolm. "Agent Rivers, I apologize for the confusion. Let's get those cuffs off you." Jenkins looked ready to protest, but the older officer shot him a warning glance. With visible reluctance, Jenkins fished out the cuff key. He removed the cuffs, his face twisted in anger. The dashcam on Jenkins's vehicle recorded every glower, every shift in posture. Malcolm rubbed his wrists where red marks had begun to form. "Are you all right?" the older officer asked Malcolm, voice low enough that Jenkins couldn't overhear. "I'm fine," Malcolm replied, not entirely believing it. "I just want to resolve this peacefully." The female officer handed Malcolm back his badge. "An ID. I'm sorry about all this. If you'd like, we can file an incident report, or you can speak to a supervisor at our precinct." Malcolm considered it. Part of him wanted to let it go. He knew how these situations could escalate, how the code of silence sometimes protected officers from accountability. But he was also aware that this wasn't an isolated incident. Jenkins's behavior hinted at a pattern. Eventually, Malcolm nodded. "I think it's necessary to file a report." Jenkins spat on the ground, a move so brazen that both of his fellow officers looked at him sharply. Without waiting for any instructions, he turned on his heel and stalked back to his squad car. One could almost sense the internal storm raging in him. The bystanders continued filming, and Malcolm was torn between relief and lingering anger. In the next 20 minutes, the female officer took an initial statement from Malcolm. He relayed the sequence of events objectively, noting the officer's refusal to check credentials and the overly aggressive approach. Jenkins hovered nearby, arms folded, glaring silently at Malcolm. The second officer gently suggested Jenkins return to routine patrol, or at least step away. Jenkins eventually got in his cruiser and drove off, leaving his fellow officers to finalize the paperwork. Word spread quickly within the department. Officers whispered that Jenkins had nearly arrested a federal agent without cause. The two bystanders, having posted their videos online, sparked a wave of public outcry. Local news outlets picked up the story, referencing official statements from the Louisville Metro Police Department about an ongoing investigation. Notably, the department refused to comment on the specifics, yet rumors were flying that dashcam footage captured the entire interaction, and it was damning. Malcolm tried to carry on with life as usual, but the incident weighed on him. Supervisor Paula Stein summoned him to a meeting at the Louisville field office. She was a stout, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, with iron-grey hair cropped close. She wasted no time in addressing the elephant in the room. "I've spoken to the chief of the Louisville Metro PD," she began. "They're opening an internal investigation. Meanwhile, that dashcam footage is likely to surface. Are you ready for what comes next?" Malcolm took a moment to steady himself. "I'd rather this not blow up, but I also won't lie about what happened." The officer acted without cause. He was, Malcolm paused, searching for words. He was intent on treating me like a criminal from the get-go. Paula nodded grimly. We don't want our agents to be targeted by local law enforcement for personal or racial reasons. We also don't want a bad cop tarnishing an entire department's reputation. We're behind you. Though he was grateful for the FBI's support, Malcolm felt uneasy. He knew how quickly the situation could spiral, with the public taking sides and the truth becoming overshadowed by sensational headlines. Days passed, and sure enough, the dashcam footage leaked. In the video, Jenkins was heard pulling Malcolm over, making curt demands, ignoring repeated offers to verify Malcolm's identity, and spouting lines that dripped with hostility, if not outright bias. The local news station, Wave 3 News, aired the clip, bleeping out certain words that sounded like curses or borderline racial slurs. Public condemnation erupted. Community leaders demanded action. Civil rights groups seized on it as yet another example of systemic issues within law enforcement. Within a week, Jenkins found himself summoned to a disciplinary hearing. His superiors couldn't ignore the outcry. Cameras from local affiliates lined the steps of the police department headquarters, waiting for sound bites. Jenkins arrived in civilian clothes, face grim. His lawyer, a quick-talking man in a pinstripe suit, argued that the footage was taken out of context and that Jenkins had reasonable suspicion. But the weight of the evidence was substantial. Meanwhile, Malcolm was asked to testify about the incident in a private session with the department's Internal Affairs Division. He recounted everything calmly, focusing on the facts. He emphasized that he complied at every step, offered his identification multiple times, and was still treated with contempt. The investigators listened intently, occasionally looking up from their notes to watch Malcolm's face. In the days leading up to the hearing's resolution, more secrets about Jenkins began to surface. He had been the subject of multiple citizen complaints, alleging excessive force and racial bias. Internal Affairs had probed him before, but always closed the cases for lack of conclusive evidence. Now, the dashcam footage provided something undeniable. It was no longer one person's word against Jenkins's. Everything came to a head when a local journalist named Ryan Connors released a bombshell report. Connors had interviewed a former partner of Jenkins officer Luis Delgado, who had recently resigned and moved to another state. Delgado claimed Jenkins frequently boasted about how he could make anyone look guilty. Delgado had witnessed Jenkins verbally harass motorists, especially black drivers, and manipulate evidence to justify his stops. Though Delgado never had proof at the time, he carried the guilt of having remained silent. Now, with the video as a focal point, Delgado broke his silence. The city reacted with outrage. Public demonstrations cropped up outside the police department, with people waving signs that read, "End police abuse and justice for all." Local politicians who had long been silent on police misconduct issues were forced to take a stand, issuing statements about comprehensive reform. Meanwhile, Malcolm found himself in an unusual position. As an FBI agent, his job was typically to investigate criminal wrongdoing at a federal level. Now he was thrust into the public eye as a victim of potential misconduct. Though many in the community lauded him for speaking out, Malcolm struggled with the unwanted attention. He received a flood of messages, some supportive, some hateful, and some from old friends who had recognized him on the news. The entire experience was draining. Still, he believed it was necessary to see things through. Ironically, in the midst of this whirlwind, Malcolm was working on a separate case investigating financial corruption within a local union. His phone rang non-stop, not just from colleagues checking in, but from reporters seeking interviews. One evening, he returned home feeling exhausted, physically and emotionally. He sank into his armchair, his mind drifting back to that tense moment on the curb when his arms were pinned behind him. The memory made his shoulders tighten. Yet, He was committed to ensuring the truth was exposed. He couldn't let Jenkins walk away unscathed. The disciplinary hearing took place in a large conference room at police headquarters. A thick tension hung over the air. Jenkins sat at one table with his lawyer, departmental brass, including the chief of police, sat at another. Malcolm was there too, along with his own bureau-appointed counsel. A small crowd filled the seats along the back wall, mostly local press and concerned citizens who had managed to secure entry. One of the internal affairs investigators played the dashcam footage on a large screen. The room was silent, save for the recorded audio. Jenkins's harsh voice echoed, "I know a con when I see one." The footage continued, capturing the entire humiliating exchange. Malcolm watched it with clenched fists, feeling a wave of anger wash over him. He stole a glance at Jenkins, whose face was stony, eyes flickering with something that looked like resentment. After the video ended, the investigator began questioning Jenkins. "Officer Jenkins, can you explain your decision not to verify Mr. Rivers's credentials when he repeatedly offered to provide them?" Jenkins's lawyer interjected, "My client had reason to believe the badge could be fake. He was merely exercising caution." The investigator pressed on. "Is it common practice to accuse someone of a crime without verifying their identification, particularly when they present a federal badge?" Jenkins shifted in his seat, clearly annoyed. "Look, I thought it was a counterfeit. We've seen it before. Criminals can make convincing fake badges. Yet you did not call the FBI or even dispatch. Why not?" Jenkins averted his gaze. It all happened quickly. He was resisting. Malcolm's counsel cut in. Resisting. The footage shows Agent Rivers calmly following every directive. Jenkins's lawyer objected, but the tension in the room was thick. The disciplinary panel clearly wasn't buying the story. The hearing continued for hours, with detailed cross-examinations and references to Jenkins's past complaints. The final blow came when Delgado's recorded testimony was played. Delgado's voice quivered with guilt as he recounted how Jenkins targeted black drivers and bragged about his stops. Gasps rippled through the audience. Jenkins's face flushed with anger, and his lawyer frantically tried to discredit Delgado as a disgruntled ex-partner. A hush fell when the panel announced it would take a brief recess to deliberate. Journalists scurried out to file updates. Malcolm stepped into the hallway, leaning against a wall for support. A wave of fatigue washed over him. The female officer who had responded that night, Officer Karen Blake, approached. She gave him a sympathetic nod. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. He's been a pain in our department for a while." Malcolm nodded. "I appreciate that." When the panel returned, the chief of police stood, adjusting his glasses. His expression was grave. After reviewing all evidence, including dashcam footage, witness statements, and prior complaints, the panel has concluded that Officer Jenkins violated multiple protocols, including but not limited to racial bias, unnecessary use of force, and dereliction of duty regarding proper verification. Effective immediately, Officer Jenkins is terminated from the Louisville Metro Police Department. Further, the findings will be referred for possible criminal charges. The audience erupted in hushed murmurs, some relieved, others outraged. Jenkins's mouth fell open, and his lawyer placed a restraining hand on his arm. But Jenkins shrugged it off, striding toward the exit. As he passed Malcolm, he shot him a venomous glare, muttering, "This isn't over." Malcolm felt a jolt in his chest, but his expression remained composed. For him, it was over. The next morning, headlines declared, "Louisville officer fired after dashcam footage reveals improper arrest of FBI agent." The city breathed a collective sigh of relief, with some praising the new era of accountability, while others claimed Jenkins was a scapegoat. But the official stance was clear. Jenkins's behavior was indefensible, yet the drama didn't end there. About a week later, Malcolm began receiving threatening letters at the FBI office. They were typed on plain paper, no return address, with words like traitor and watch your back. Though they were unsettling, the Bureau's security procedures kicked in immediately. They examined each note for forensic evidence. Malcolm had a gnawing suspicion about who might be behind them. Jenkins certainly had the motivation, but the letters could also be from any number of fringe individuals who saw Malcolm as emblematic of the system. One afternoon, as Malcolm left the FBI building, he caught a glimpse of a figure standing across the street, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low. The figure hurried off as soon as Malcolm turned. Malcolm's pulse quickened. He realized that the scrutiny might not just be from the public, but from Jenkins himself, who had made that ominous remark, "This isn't over." The FBI launched an internal threat assessment. Supervisory Special Agent Stein assigned 2 agents to coordinate with local law enforcement, ensuring Malcolm's residence and routine were safe. In an ironic twist, the very department that once harbored Jenkins was now cooperating with the FBI to protect Malcolm from potential retaliation. Meanwhile, Jenkins had vanished from public view, rumored to be staying out of state while he appealed his termination. The district attorney's office was still determining whether to pursue criminal charges for civil rights violations. Despite the threats, Malcolm tried to live his life as before. He focused on his ongoing cases, spent time with close friends and family, and tried to push the incident to the back of his mind. But certain nights, he found himself reliving those tense moments by the roadside, the memory of handcuffs biting into his wrists. The outpouring of community support, however, gave him solace. People he'd never met sent letters thanking him for standing up to injustice. Civil rights groups invited him to speak at seminars about law enforcement accountability. Ultimately, karma came for Jenkins in a way that few had anticipated. Investigative reporters kept digging into his past. They unearthed evidence of falsified reports, illegal searches, and one instance in which Jenkins appeared to have planted evidence on a suspect. The district attorney convened a grand jury which indicted him on multiple counts of official misconduct. When Jenkins returned to Kentucky to address these charges, he was arrested. The once proud officer found himself in handcuffs, the very image that had so often spelled doom for others. The cycle of justice had come full circle. Malcolm, on the other hand, focused on healing from the ordeal. He was a private man who never sought the spotlight. Now, ironically, he was something of a local figure. His story had become a catalyst for discussions about reform in police training and oversight. Real changes took shape in the Louisville Metro Police Department, new protocols for verifying identification, additional training on implicit bias, and a renewed emphasis on transparency. While the department still faced many challenges, the downfall of Bradley Jenkins was a stark lesson for officers who believed they could act with impunity. Weeks turned into months. The city settled back into a semblance of normalcy. Malcolm continued his work at the FBI, quietly cracking down on white-collar criminals, never seeking any special attention, but people still whispered his name when they recalled the fiasco that had rocked the department. On a personal level, Malcolm found new resolve to address civil rights issues in his investigations. Whenever a case involved racial bias or potential police misconduct, he approached it with an extra layer of determination, motivated by what he had experienced firsthand. As for Jenkins, he faced a criminal trial. The dashcam footage had been the catalyst for unraveling his entire track record. The jury deliberated for less than a day before finding him guilty on multiple counts of official misconduct. He was sentenced to a short prison term and a fine far from a life sentence, but a clear condemnation of his actions. Karma had, indeed, struck back in a way that left no doubt. Abusing the badge carried consequences. After the verdict, reporters swarmed Malcolm once again for a statement. Standing on the courthouse steps, Malcolm chose his words carefully. He expressed gratitude for the justice system, but also emphasized that this was just one case in a broader struggle. He insisted that trust between the community and law enforcement was paramount, and that both sides had to work toward mutual respect and accountability. In the months that followed, life gradually returned to its ordinary pace for Malcolm. He received fewer stares in public. The letters of support still arrived occasionally, sometimes mixed with the rare hateful note, but security measures ensured he was well protected. The Louisville field office recognized his composure under pressure and his role in promoting accountability. He was quietly lauded among his peers for handling a personal crisis without letting it overshadow his professional responsibilities. Late one evening, Malcolm took a walk through downtown Louisville, reflecting on the whirlwind that had become his life. The summer heat had given way to a crisp autumn breeze. Leaves stirred along the sidewalks, lit by the warm glow of street lamps. He thought about how everything had changed in an instant, that fateful night, the glare of flashing lights in his rear-view mirror, the unexpected call to step out of his vehicle. A chance encounter had ripped open a festering wound in the city's law enforcement system, but it also sparked a dialogue that was sorely needed. He passed by Jefferson Square Park, where protests had taken place months earlier. Now, the park was quiet, with a few people sitting on benches, lost in their own thoughts. The silhouettes of tall buildings loomed overhead, silent witnesses to the city's constant evolution. Malcolm paused near the fountain, letting the gentle rush of water fill his ears. He exhaled, feeling a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in a long time. Memory flashed the moment Jenkins demanded he step out of the car, the officer's eyes filled with a hostility that was shocking yet all too familiar. Malcolm swallowed hard, reminding himself that something positive had emerged from all that fear and anger. Jenkins had been exposed, fired, and later convicted. The police department was now under more rigorous oversight. It was a small piece in a much larger puzzle, but it was progress. Reaching into his pocket, Malcolm removed his cell phone to check the time. He noticed a message from Paula Stein, his supervisor. It read, "Heard Jenkins' sentencing is official. Good job staying strong through it all. We have an important financial crimes case to discuss Monday morning briefing. Have a good weekend." Malcolm allowed a faint smile. Life went on, and so would he, dedicated to the principles he believed in, shaped by a personal experience that forever changed his perspective. He turned away from the fountain and resumed walking, the city lights guiding him home. Somewhere in a dingy prison cell, Jenkins might be ruminating on the night that cost him everything. Malcolm, on the other hand, had gained a deeper understanding of the fragile boundary between justice and abuse of power, a lesson that would fuel his work for years to come. His steps echoed in the quiet streets, a reminder of the solitary path that sometimes accompanies doing the right thing. Yet, he carried with him a renewed sense of purpose. For all the heartbreak, the fear, and the anger, Malcolm had persevered, and in that perseverance lay hope for Louisville, for law enforcement, and for everyone who believed in a better, fairer system. The dashcam footage had exposed a hard truth, but it also paved the way for transformation. In the end, what might have been a simple, routine stop became a turning point in a much larger story, one that would shape the fabric of the city for years to come. Thank you for joining me on this intense journey of truth and justice. The story of the night that Special Agent Malcolm Rivers was wrongfully detained by Officer Jenkins shows how easily power can be abused and how courage, perseverance, and the undeniable truth of a dashcam video can spark real accountability. If you found this story compelling, please consider helping us spread the word. Share this video with your friends and family. Hit that like button to show your support, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that deserve to be told. When we shine a spotlight on abuses of power, we pave the way for change. So ring that notification bell to stay updated on our latest content. Your engagement truly matters. Together, we can continue highlighting these stories and holding those in authority to the highest standards. Thank you, and see you next time.